In a land where water was scarcer than mercy and trust had to be earned with blood, a young woman named Alea lived at the edge of her tribe's territory, far from the fires where stories were told and justice was measured in silence. She was not known for her strength in battle or her voice in council, but for the quiet kindness in her hands, the way she braided her sister's hair each morning and shared her last crumbs with the old dog who limped behind her. It was on one of those days, when the sky threatened storm and the air hung heavy with dust, that Alea found a girl crumpled near the riverbed, starved, barely breathing, and marked with the colors of a rival people. Every lesson she had been taught warned her to walk away. Her tribe had suffered too much at the hands of strangers. But something in the girl's eyes, wide, cracked with pain, yet still pleading, tore through every wall fear had ever built inside her. Alea broke her own fast to give the girl her bread. She let her drink from the water gourd she had carried for 2 days. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled her from the dirt and hid her beneath animal skins, whispering prayers older than the trail itself. In doing so, she didn't just save a life. She crossed a line no one in her bloodline had dared approach. That night, the wind howled like it carried the spirits of every ancestor who had bled on that soil. Alea sat in silence, listening to the girl's shallow breaths, wondering what price the dawn would bring. Her tribe would call a betrayal. Her mother would weep. Her father would not look her in the eye. And yet, she had never felt more certain of anything. The land had taken so much from them all. Maybe it was time someone gave something back, not with violence, but with mercy. What Alea did not know, what no one could have imagined, was that this act, small as it seemed in the scope of a brutal world, would echo far beyond her tent. By morning, a delegation stood at the edge of the settlement, not with weapons drawn, but with an offering, a gesture of peace wrapped in tradition. They had come not only to thank her for saving one of their own, but to offer something more sacred, more shocking, a union, a husband, a vow sealed not by conquest, but by gratitude. This is not a tale of romance born in laughter or dances around a fire. This is a story carved into the bone of survival, of how one girl's choice to feed the dying would forever change the fate of 2 tribes and her own heart. What followed would test her, bless her, and ultimately reveal a truth older than war, that in the harshest corners of the West, even a crumb of kindness can become the seed of something far greater than any of us expect. Alea woke before the sun, her breath clouding in the cold air, her heart still beating too fast from what she had done the day before. The girl she had saved remained unconscious, her thin chest rising in shallow, uncertain rhythm. Outside the tent, no one yet knew. The tribe stirred in murmurs and smoke, unaware that under Alea's roof lay a girl with enemy blood. Her father's voice boomed through the camp, calling for the morning gathering. Alea wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped out, her stomach in knots, knowing that silence would only shield her for so long. The morning meeting passed like a fog. Elders spoke of border disputes, of hunters who vanished, and of crops that failed before the rains. No one mentioned the girl. No one had seen her. But Alea felt eyes pressing into her back all the same. Not suspicion yet, but the weight of something unspoken. She offered no clues, no tremble in her tone, no glances behind. Yet inside her, a storm brewed. What if the girl didn't survive? What if she did and ran? Would they come for Alea? Would she still believe it had been worth it? Back in her tent, Alea knelt beside the girl and offered her another piece of bread. Her lips barely parted. Then, finally, the stranger opened her eyes dry, dazed, and distant. Her voice was a whisper, no louder than the breeze outside. "Why?" she asked. Alea had no answer that could survive the daylight. "Because you were dying," she said. That was all. She didn't mention the way her hands had shaken, or the voice inside her that told her this act would cost her everything she knew. The girl only nodded, then closed her eyes again, trusting a stranger in a land that had taught her not to. That afternoon, the girl spoke again. Her name was Saya. She had fled from a raid, not one led by Alea's people, but from an offshoot tribe that had betrayed them both. She'd been traveling for days without food, her wounds hidden under layers of dust and silence. She didn't ask for more. She didn't cry. She only watched Alea with eyes too old for her years. And in that shared silence, something new took root. Not alliance, not yet, but something gentler, more dangerous, recognition. That night, as Alea slept beside the fire, the earth shifted beneath her. Dreams came in flashes, a circle of men on horseback, a sky full of smoke, and her own name being spoken in a language she did not know. When she woke, sweat dripped down her spine, and her hands were clenched into fists. Outside, the air was unnaturally still, and when she stepped outside, she saw them, a procession of riders at the edge of the camp, marked in the colors of Saya's people, not armed for war, but wrapped in cloth of peace. The tribe stirred with confusion and unease. Visitors from outside the border rarely came without blood on their minds. Yet these riders did not shout, did not draw steel. They dismounted slowly, respectfully, and stood with their hands open, as if waiting for permission to breathe. The elder stepped forward, a man with white paint across his face and a woven band across his brow, and addressed the chief in a language laced with reverence. "We have come for the girl who gave bread to our daughter," he said, "and we have not come empty-handed." Whispers ran like wildfire through the camp. Some wanted to know what Alea had done. Others simply stared, eyes darting between her and the strangers. Alea felt her breath catch. She hadn't told anyone, not even her mother. But now, it was clear, the girl had not remained hidden. Someone had seen her, or perhaps the story of mercy traveled faster than footsteps. Either way, the moment of reckoning had arrived. She stood tall, heart pounding, and stepped forward, her presence calm though everything inside her screamed. Saya emerged from the tent, limping but upright. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they locked onto a woman among the visitors, her mother. The older woman ran forward and embraced her, sobbing openly, her tears streaking through the war paint. No one spoke. Even the chief was silent. It wasn't until the elder raised his hand again that the meaning of their visit became clear. "In our custom," he said, "when one saves a soul without cause, the spirits say it is not just compassion, it is a sign. And so, we come to offer Alea a bond, a bridge between bloodlines. We offer her a husband." A gasp rippled through the camp. Alea's father stepped forward, stunned. His eyes searched hers, trying to decipher if she had known this would happen. But she was as speechless as the rest. A husband? A peace offering? She had never considered marriage. Not yet. And certainly not to someone from a rival tribe. Yet, she didn't move. She didn't run. Her instincts, the same ones that had told her to save Saya, whispered again. This is not the end of something. It's the beginning. The elder gestured, and a young man stepped forward. He was tall, with kind eyes and a quiet strength in the way he moved. He said nothing. He only looked at Alea with the same gaze she had seen in the girl the day before. Not pity, not fear, but respect. A kind of respect that didn't need to be earned through war or words. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting golden light across the plains, Alea realized that fate in the Old West didn't always ride a horse or carry a blade. Sometimes it wore the face of gratitude and came with the offer of a hand. The camp buzzed with tension long after the visitors had pitched their tents near the river. Some of Alea's people saw the offer as a blessing, a rare chance to end the bitter silence between the two tribes. Others viewed it as an insult, a trap hidden behind gifts and ceremony. Alea herself remained quiet. She wandered the edge of the river at dusk, watching the water reflect the firelight from both camps. Her thoughts moved like the current, slow, winding, filled with shadows of uncertainty. Was she ready to belong to someone? Or was this about more than her? Her father came to her that night, his face weathered from the sun and the years of war. He said nothing at first, just stood beside her in silence, the way only fathers do when words cannot reach the weight of what needs to be said. Finally, he asked, "Do you want this?" The question didn't come with pressure or expectation, only a rare softness in his voice. Alea didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I know I didn't do it for reward. I gave bread because she was dying." Her father nodded. "And that is why they honor you. Not because you wanted something, but because you gave everything when you had nothing to gain." The next morning, the ceremony began. Simple, ancient, not a wedding as her people knew it, but something more symbolic, a hand-fasting, a recognition of trust between once rivals. The tribes circled together, elders chanting in both tongues. A white cord was tied between Aleya's wrist and the young man's, binding not just flesh, but intention. His name was Kale. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was calm, measured, and full of depth. "I will not claim you," he said during the vow, "but I will walk beside you, if you choose it." The tribe watched in silence. This was no conquest, no surrender. It was something new, something few had seen in their lifetime. The joining of two people through compassion, not convenience or power. And Aleya, though nervous, felt something shift in her chest, a quiet strength. She looked at Kale, then at Saya standing beside her mother, and felt a deep truth rise in her. She was no longer just a girl who gave bread. She had become something else entirely. A bridge. That night, the drums played not for war, but for peace. Both camps shared food, smoke, and song. Old warriors told stories of battles past, and children from both sides chased fireflies in the dark. The land, long soaked in suspicion, now breathed differently. And Aleya sat by the fire, Kale at her side, Saya curled beside her, and felt, for the first time, that perhaps the West could change. Not quickly, not easily, but maybe, just maybe, with enough kindness it could heal. The days that followed were filled with small gestures that carried great weight. Kale remained on Aleya's land, not as a stranger, but as a silent worker, mending tools, repairing the outer fences, helping elders carry water to the high grounds. He didn't try to impose himself. He didn't force closeness. Instead, he watched, listened, and waited. Aleya found herself studying him the same way she once studied the movement of deer or the signs of an oncoming storm. He was deliberate, patient, a man raised not for noise, but for steadiness. Saya, meanwhile, grew stronger with each passing day. She followed Aleya like a shadow, eager to help, eager to learn. At night, they would sit together outside the tent, watching the stars, and Aleya would tell her stories, not of war, but of hope, of winds that once sang peace across the valley. "Do you think they'll stay?" Saya asked one night. "Your people?" Aleya hesitated. "Maybe," she said, "if the land accepts it, if we do." Peace, she had learned, wasn't a decision. It was a discipline, one that required choosing every day not to reach for the blade. But not all were ready for that choice. A small group of warriors from Aleya's tribe began to stir dissent. They whispered that the guests had stayed too long, that the girl should have been left to die, that Aleya had opened the gates to something they weren't prepared to fight. Her father, once proud, now faced growing pressure. Aleya overheard the arguments, that she had betrayed her bloodline, that the old ways were being poisoned by mercy. Each word stung like ash in the lungs. She didn't respond with fury. Instead, she walked to the elders' circle and spoke. Not in anger, but in truth. "I didn't bring strangers to destroy us," she said. "I brought them because we were already destroying ourselves. We have lived in silence, in suspicion, for too long. This is what happened with Saya. With Kale, this is a chance. And if we let fear decide for us again, we lose more than we know." Her voice trembled, but her feet did not. The silence that followed her words was long. Then, one elder, the oldest among them, stood and said, "There are things even older than our anger. One of them is grace." The tide didn't turn all at once. But that day, the fire of resentment cooled. And as the smoke curled upward into the open sky, Aleya knew that while kindness may start with bread, it survives through courage. The late summer sun cast long golden shadows across the valley as the two camps continued to live side by side, still separate in ways, yet growing ever closer. Children from both tribes now played together in the open field, their laughter piercing the hardened silence of the older generations. Aleya watched them from a distance, her heart torn between pride and caution. Every moment of peace felt like a borrowed breath, beautiful but fleeting. She knew peace in the Old West came at a cost, and often it was the brave who paid it first. Kale remained near, but never pushed himself in her life. He waited, working at the edge of the village, never forcing conversation. One evening, after a long day repairing the well, he brought her a carved figure, a small wolf, its back arched as if ready to leap. "You remind me of this," he said. "Not because you bite, but because you watch everything and you never let fear own you. Alea took the carving in silence, her fingers brushing over the smooth wood. She said nothing, but that night, she placed the wolf beside her sleeping mat. But the uneasy peace began to ripple when a scout returned with news from the east. Another tribe, bitter rivals of both Alea's people and Kale's, had been seen near the outer ridge. Known for raids, they would not care for treaties or gestures. They hunted opportunity, and a divided people was ripe for the taking. The elders called for a gathering. Some feared war. Others saw it as proof that welcoming outsiders had made them weak. Once again, Alea found herself at the center of a storm she had never meant to cause. This time, she did not hesitate. She stood before both tribes, her people and Kale's, and spoke with fire in her words. "We can fight each other again," she said, "or we can stand together against those who would see us fall apart. The blood in our soil has long dried. Let's not spill more when we've come this far." Her voice carried across the gathering, drawing murmurs from warriors, nods from mothers, and tears from the old ones who had buried too many sons. Kale stepped beside her, not to lead, not to take the stage, just to stand with her, and that presence spoke louder than any speech. That night, scouts were sent in pairs, one from each tribe. Fires were watched, horses were readied, but no blade were drawn between them. Instead, under the threat of an approaching enemy, a bond forged in bread, blood, and mercy grew stronger. For the first time in generations, they were not two tribes watching one another. They were one people, watching the horizon together. The enemy did come. 5 nights later, beneath a sky so dark the stars seemed afraid to shine. They struck swift, aiming for the food stores and the herds. But they hadn't expected unity. Warriors from both tribes rose as one, moving like a single body across the hills. Kale led one flank. Alea's brother led the other. And though there was fear, there was also faith. Faith that what they were defending was no longer just tents and food, but a fragile future built on trust. Alea stood on the ridge, bow in hand, her eyes tracking every movement below. When one of the enemy riders broke through the outer lines, she didn't flinch. Her arrow found its mark, swift and clean. It was the first time she had ever drawn blood, and she did not weep. Not because she was numb, but because she understood this was not killing for pride. This was protection. For Saya. For Kale. For everyone who had dared to believe the old wounds could heal. By dawn, the invaders had fled. The cost had been paid. 3 warriors lost, 2 wounded, but the line had held. Fires were relit, not for mourning, but for survival. The tribe gathered in silence, exhaustion painted on every face. And in the center stood Alea, dirt on her hands, her braid half undone, a young girl transformed into a leader not by birthright, but by choice. The elders bowed their heads, not to her name, but to her strength. In the days that followed, everything changed. The story of the girl who gave bread, and who united enemies under a single banner, spread like wildfire across the plains. Other tribes sent messengers, not with threats, but with offerings. Land was traded, roads were opened, and slowly, a new kind of West began to take shape, one not ruled by gunpowder and revenge, but by stories of courage and the rare power of mercy in the face of hate. Alea and Kale did not marry with ceremony or song. One morning, they simply walked into the sunrise together, hand in hand, 2 figures joined by choices that no elder could have arranged. Their bond was not born of obligation. It was forged in fire, sacrifice, and the echo of a single act of kindness, a piece of bread, offered to a dying girl, beneath a sky full of silence and fate. As peace settled over the valley like a long-awaited rain, the land began to change. Trees once dry and brittle showed new growth. The river, which had dwindled to a trickle during the years of war, now ran clearer and stronger than it had in seasons. The animals returned to the hills, and with them came a quiet understanding that harmony between men often echoes through the earth itself. The people said the land was healing, but those who truly knew the story whispered that it wasn't just the land, it was the hearts of those who lived on it. Alea and Kale became something more than figures of legend. They became teachers, not just of words or weapons, but of ways. Young ones from both tribes sat at their feet under shade trees and learned not how to fight, but when not to. Kale taught them to track not for war, but for preservation. Alea taught them to read the wind, to know when to listen, and when to stand firm. Even Saya, now strong and tall, joined in, telling the story of how she had nearly died, and how a stranger's bread had given her more than life. It had given her a future. Still, not every scar disappeared. Some elders remained bitter. Some warriors nursed grudges like flint in their fists, always ready to strike. But those voices grew quieter with each harvest, each shared festival, each child born under stars no longer divided by fear. The people didn't forget the bloodshed. They didn't ignore the loss, but they stopped letting it define them. And in that, a miracle bloomed. Not sudden, not loud, but real. One morning, Alea stood by the same river where she had once found Saya. The memory washed over her. The heat, the fear, the broken girl barely clinging to breath. She knelt and placed a flat stone in the water, then whispered a prayer. Not to forget the past, but to honor the moment that had rewritten her entire life. Kale joined her, his hand resting on her shoulder. That day, he said, you changed more than fate. You changed us all. And he was right. Because sometimes, the West isn't just about what's taken. It's about what's given. A crust of bread, a single breath, a quiet defiance in the face of old loss. These things, small and soft, can rewrite the hardest of histories. And Alea, who had never dreamed of legacy, had become the root of one. Years passed. Children grew. Elders passed on. The two tribes, once enemies, became known as the River People, a name born from the place where everything had begun. They traded together, traveled together, and married across what had once been hostile borders. And through it all, the story of Alea never faded. It was told by grandmothers by the fire, carved into stone by artists, and etched into the memory of the hills themselves. Saya became a healer, soft-spoken, but powerful. Her hands, once frail and trembling, now held the strength to mend broken bones and broken spirits alike. Every time she placed her hand over a wound, she remembered that moment under Alea's tent. She kept the piece of cloth Alea had wrapped around her shoulder, and though it was tattered, she wore it under her dress like a secret promise, to always give what she could, even when she had little left. Kale grew into a leader, not by title, but by the way people turned to him when they were unsure. He refused every offer to become chief, saying only, leaders shouldn't be chosen by vote, but by the way they walk when no one watches. He and Alea built a home near the old trail where the two tribes first joined. It was made of wood, earth, and stories, and its doors were never closed to anyone in need. As for Alea, she never claimed her story as her own. When people asked why she gave the bread, why she risked everything, she would simply say, because she was dying, and I was still breathing. Her answer never changed. And with time, the people came to understand. It wasn't the act alone that changed the world, but the heart behind it, the courage to give when giving felt like loss. On her 50th birthday, the entire valley gathered to honor her. There were no crowns, no gold, no thrones, just firelight, music, and a moment of silence where everyone, from the oldest hunter to the youngest child, placed a stone in the river, one by one, in memory of the girl who gave bread to a stranger, and, in doing so, gave a future to them all. The riverbank, once barren and brittle, had become a sacred place, not because of temples or shrines, but because of memory, living, breathing memory. Each stone laid there over the years stood for a choice made in mercy, a moment when someone decided to build rather than break. And still, travelers came, some seeking help, others bringing gifts, but all of them carrying stories. The name, Alea, had become a quiet kind of legend, not the kind told with loud voices or fists pounding tables, but with lowered eyes and reverent tones. Alea never changed the way she lived. She still rose before the sun, still grew her herbs by the eastern wall, still kept her hands busy and her voice calm. She was not interested in becoming anything more than who she already was. That, perhaps, was what made her story feel so heavy in the hearts of others. She didn't want greatness. She simply lived it when it mattered. And while her body aged and her hair turned silver, her spirit remained fierce and watchful, like the wolf Kale had once carved for her so long ago. Kale stayed by her side through it all. Their love was never one of fiery passion or public declarations. It was steady as stone, forged in the embers of shared trust. He knew her thoughts by the way her shoulders tensed. She read his moods in the rhythm of his steps. There was no need for constant words. They had already said everything through what they had endured together. Their bond had been born without promise, and yet had survived everything: silence, suspicion, even war. And Saya, grown now and healer of both tribes, often came to sit by Alea in the late afternoons. She would place her hand over the old woman's and whisper, "You saved me." And Alea would always reply, "No, you found your way back. I just opened the tent." Those words became a saying among the people, a proverb for generations. Open the tent. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing one can do is simply not turn away. As the land continued to bloom and generations passed through its soil, Alea's legacy was no longer just a memory. It was a way of being. Children were taught not just how to hunt or plant or ride, but how to offer, how to see, and how to hold on to humanity even when the world feels too harsh to allow it. And though the name Alea eventually faded into the roots of time, the fire she had lit, with one piece of bread, one act of compassion, never did. The final winter of Alea's life came softly. There were no signs of illness, no omens, just the slowing of steps, the longer hours spent near the fire, the distant gaze, as if she were already seeing something beyond the horizon. She spoke less, but smiled more. The kind of smile worn only by those who have truly lived, who have carried burdens, known heartbreak, and still chosen to love the world anyway. The tribe didn't speak of her aging as a loss. They spoke of it as a season, sacred, slow, and worthy of reverence. When her time came, she asked only to be brought to the river one last time. Kale carried her in his arms, his face still strong, though tears lined his cheeks. Saya walked beside them, holding the same cloth she had once been wrapped in, now faded and soft like an old memory. The people gathered in silence as Alea was laid beside the current. She looked up at the sky, her fingers brushing the cold earth, and whispered, "I'm still breathing." Those were her final words. Gentle, whole, undimmed. Her burial was unlike any seen before. Stones were not just laid in the river. They were carved with the names of those who had chosen peace because of her. Hundreds of them. A map of lives redirected, healed, transformed. The wind that passed through the valley that day carried not sorrow, but stillness. The kind of stillness that only follows when something truly sacred has come to rest. Kale never left the home they had built. He lived many more years, walking the edges of the land, keeping her garden alive, telling stories to children who never knew her voice but felt its echo in everything around them. He taught them what she had taught him, that kindness was not weakness, and that true courage often looks like softness in a hard world. When he finally passed, the people buried him beside her and placed between them a single loaf of bread, wrapped in linen. To this day, if you walk the river trail in the valley between the old borders, you will find those stones. Some cracked, some worn smooth, but all still standing. And if you listen carefully beyond the birdsong and the breeze, you might hear a story, not shouted, but whispered by the land itself, of a young girl who gave bread to a dying stranger, and, in doing so, fed a future no war could destroy. In the dust and danger of the Old West, where most tales are written with blood and buried in silence, the story of Alea stands apart. It is not about conquest or revenge, but about courage, the quiet kind. The kind that feeds a dying girl with the last piece of bread, knowing it may cost everything. Alea didn't wear armor or carry a rifle. Her weapon was compassion, and in a land that had forgotten how to forgive, that made her braver than any gunslinger. Her story reminds us that real power often lies in the softest choices, the ones made when no one is watching. Through one small act of mercy, she rewrote the future of two tribes. She didn't just save a life. She planted a seed that bloomed into unity, family, and peace. Her legacy wasn't carved into stone by her own hand, but in the way people lived after her. Because the truth is, kindness doesn't end when the act is done. It ripples. It echoes. And sometimes, it builds a bridge strong enough to carry generations across the deep ravines of hatred and loss. What if we carried that lesson into our own lives? What if we stopped waiting for the world to change and started changing it ourselves? Not through grand gestures, but through small ones. A word, a look, a choice to help instead of harm. Aleya's story teaches us that a single moment of humanity, one offered without reward, can light the way for hundreds more. And when we act not out of fear, but out of hope, we become more than just part of history. We become the turning point of it. So now, ask yourself, when the moment comes, when no one's looking, when it would be easier to walk away, will you offer the bread? Will you be the one who opens the tent, even when the cost is high? Because sometimes, the smallest act in the harshest hour becomes the very reason peace is possible. And maybe, just maybe, the future is shaped not by those who shout the loudest, but by those who choose to care the quietest. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep in your chest or brought a tear to your eye, let that feeling live on. Subscribe to the channel to walk beside more stories like this. Leave a comment sharing what this tale meant to you. And if this message deserves to be remembered, give it a like, not for the numbers, but so that others too might learn that in a world full of fire, mercy still burns brighter.